Good evening. My name is Sally Grubb. I'm co-president of the League of Women Voters of Tompkins County, and we're delighted to welcome you tonight to a candidates debate for the special election for Tompkins County Legislative District 2. And our two candidates are Veronica Pilar and Leslie Schill. And I want to remind you that the League of Women Voters is a non-partisan organization committed to defending democracy and empowering voters by bringing you the most up-to-date information available on national, state, and local elections. And it is our pleasure tonight to host this candidates debate so that you can learn in a non-partisan fashion the views of Veronica Pilar and Leslie Schill, who are our two candidates. And I would thank both of them for their public service in being willing to represent District 2 at the county level. And we will start with questions now. Well, not with questions, I'm sorry. We will start with opening statements first by Leslie Schill and then by Veronica Pilar. So over to you, Leslie.
Good evening. Thank you, everyone. Really excited to be here this evening. Very pleased to talk to voters and District 2 residents. My name is Leslie Schill. I'm a longtime resident of Fall Creek. Been here 13 years this time around. I'm a working parent who lives in the neighborhood. I have worked at the county before, and today I work at Cornell, heading up the campus planning department. I'm a professional municipal planner who's had just about 20 years now of experience working for local governments, as well as now I'm doing town gown work. I'm a seasoned leader, and I am focusing my platform on public health. I think that the critical time is facing us right now to address COVID. I am very focused on supporting our County Department of Health in its efforts in making sure we address COVID locally. I have a much broader platform I'm excited to talk about tonight, but that is the first and foremost.
Thank you. Veronica.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Veronica Pilar. I am an educator, a scientist, an organizer, and activist. I've been a Tompkins County resident, mostly in District 2, for over 10 years. And I'm currently a leader in our local chapter of Showing Up for Racial Justice, as well as a science teacher at both the high school and college levels. Through my varied community involvement over the years, I've seen come to really love our county and those who run it, but also seen plenty of barriers to access to institutions and limitations in who's at the table making decisions. So I am running for this position to be a bridge between grassroots community and local government. And I'm committed to making all my decisions through a lens of justice and equity for all people in the county. My top priorities are working for safe and affordable housing, workforce development through creating green jobs, and working toward municipal broadband. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
And thank you. And one thing I forgot to tell everybody who is here is that if you would like to submit a question, you should do it in the chat box and submit your question to questions for candidates. And they will be reviewed and passed on to me to present to the candidates. But now the first question that we have received ahead of time and for tonight, which I will address to Veronica for the first time. And you have 1 minute to answer. Then Leslie, you have 1 minute. And then you may each, if you wish, riposte for 45 seconds. And then depending on how the conversation is going, I will allow you a further riposte for 30 seconds. So here is our first question, and it regards the cost of living in Ithaca. And we have to remember that your district is firmly in the city of Ithaca as opposed to the wider county. Per the Economic Policy Institute Family Budget Calculator, The cost for a two-parent and two-child household to live in Ithaca in 2016 was estimated at $92,600. Today, and that's only 4 years later, the cost is estimated at $111,900, a 21% increase. Taxes are estimated to be the second largest cost for families in Ithaca, only behind childcare. How do you plan on reducing the tax burden in our community? Veronica, you start this time.
Thank you. Great question. I think, so sorry, my cat bumped my camera. The high cost of living is a huge problem, and it does expand outside of Ithaca. You noted our district is in the city because as the cost of living here get higher, people whose communities are here, who work in the city, can no longer afford to live here and end up living in other parts of the county, which becomes an equity issue as well as a climate justice issue as people are using cars to get around. Two things I would do are build more housing that is affordable to people at lower income levels. Understand that even in this district, we have a huge diversity of incomes, all the way down to zero. And also, I would propose moving some of our tax burden from property taxes to an income tax and advocating for the state to allow us to do so.
Leslie.
Thank you for the question. Taxes locally are a long-standing issue, certainly in all of New York. Upstate New York certainly considers taxes to be a primary issue when thinking about cost of living. These numbers that you've just shared with us they're really high, right? And District 2, cost of housing, whether you're a renter or an owner, is extremely high. I think that growing our tax base is critical. And so building new housing and growing our housing stock across all types. We need market housing. We need affordable housing. We need senior housing. We need housing that gives people real choice and that can add to the tax base. We need to support local businesses that also pay into our tax base. And we need to look at the services. We have to have honest discussions around budgeting so that we make sure that we are distributing the services to the needs of folks equitably across this community.
Thank you, Leslie. Now it's your turn to answer the next question first. And the next question, appropriately enough, addresses affordable housing questions. Transportation in the county is an important issue, and inadequate public transportation affects the ability of many to get affordable housing. What are your thoughts about our current public transportation, and what would you like to see changed or added to it?
Thank you. Certainly, transportation is integrally tied with housing, with work, and making sure that the three support one another are the critical elements to making sure that we have vibrant communities that support everyone within the community. I would say that our local transit system is amazingly robust for a community of this size. TCAT really does great work. It services campuses, downtown, rural areas. It pushes outside of our county in a couple of spots. And it supports commuter traffic as well as daily traffic. That said, if you are living in an area that's less dense, it's really difficult to always make sure that public transportation is servicing your needs. I propose that we make sure that all of our future development happens in a nodal development scenario. So that's in the villages and city of Ithaca, particularly for dense development, where we have infrastructure and supporting networks of services and jobs. That helps us make sure that our transit is best used and supports the majority of the population.
Thank you. Veronica.
Great question. I think that TCAT, our bus system, is fantastic where it goes and does a really good job of serving Ithaca centrally, but it's really limited in where it can get people. For instance, if you live in Lansing and work or go to school in Dryden, you are going to be commuting for hours and hours if you try to take the bus. You'll have to go through downtown Ithaca, and that does not work well for people. And again, this is most affecting people often who are living far from their work and school centers, again, because of rising housing costs. So I would propose to really expand TCAT as much as possible. With more funding, we could serve more area and support programs like T-Connect that branch out service from the far rural lines, as well as look at, again, where are we building housing and put that more in accessible, walkable locations as much as the laws allow.
Thank you. So do either of you want to add to your statements, Leslie, or are you happy?
I would add one thing, if I might.
Yeah.
Making sure we have multimodal hubs is really critical for that last leg of the journey. So if you're living in a rural community, a village, or a hamlet, to make sure that our bus system plugs into, say, bike parking, park and rides, areas where we can make sure that people don't have to have a disconnect in their trip. If you make it easy for folks and affordable, of course, then people will take really convenient, clean, efficient transit. And that's what we have. We have a good transit system. I would say further expanding it would probably dilute what you get for your transit system. We want to support the density of ridership. That's the model.
Thank you. Veronica? No. Thank you. Now, Veronica, you I think I got this right. You answer this question first, okay? The next question is, it has been suggested that this community only pays lip service to the need for affordable housing. What steps do you think the county should be taking to make owner-occupied housing and rental units truly affordable for people who wish to work and live here? How would you like to see the issue of affordable housing in the county addressed?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the last sentence?
How would you like to see the issue of affordable housing in the county addressed?
Okay, thank you. Yes, I hear that we only pay lip service to affordable housing. And one big problem is that we call housing affordable if it is affordable for the particular people who it's targeted at, which is not just all people. It will be people at a certain income level. And even then, we often imagine that paying 30 or 35% of your income is affordable, when really 25% would be a better target. So I propose defining more clearly what affordable is and for whom, and when we are approving and funding developments, shifting those income targets, shifting that percent of income target to change what we mean by affordable. Additionally, I want to support initiatives like the Community Housing Development Funds to continue, like the land trust model that allows people to more cheaply purchase homes that they're going to live in.
Leslie.
Thank you. Yes, I am a program oversight committee member of our Community Development Housing Fund. I managed the program when I worked at the Tompkins County Planning Department, and now I've been on the committee the last 4 years as an oversight member. I would say this is an excellent model initiative. Many other communities in upstate New York and beyond New York have reached out to us. This has brought funds from the city, the county, Cornell together to leverage millions of dollars in federal and state funding in order to bring, at this point, more than 600 units of affordable housing to this community. That is significant in an 11-year time period. Of course, we should advance that and bring it to other communities, including towns that are now joining the fund. In addition, though, that's countywide, and that's about big new developments. A few of those have been in District 2. But District 2 is largely built. So looking at infill development opportunities, accessory dwelling units, this really means looking at zoning and working together with City of Ithaca.
Thank you. Veronica, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yes. I do think another piece of this is it's important to name the pattern of unaffordability of housing. We know that we have a history in downtown Ithaca of gentrification, rising prices that has pushed especially Black and brown people out of homeownership and physically further, like out to the West End and up out West Hill. So I think that if we don't acknowledge our history of pushing lower income people out of the center, we're not going to be able to solve the problem. That's an important part. We also have to acknowledge that Cornell is driving a lot of that pattern. I think the city proposed adding more funds into the Community Housing Development Fund if Cornell and the county would match. I'd push the county to do so and invite Cornell as well.
Thank you. Leslie.
Thank you. I do agree that there is a concern about gentrification now, and that costs are becoming exorbitant so that families and marginalized communities are getting pushed out of, say, Center Ithaca. There are some really excellent efforts. I would name Ithaca Neighborhood Housing Services, INHS, as one of the leading nonprofits in this community that takes very seriously focused efforts on bringing affordable housing downtown. And there are some efforts right now happening there, particularly right down on Buffalo Street, right? So the former Catholic school will soon be affordable housing right in downtown. Likewise, our waterfront, which is in District 2, is a great opportunity for new housing and a mixed-use walkable community.
Thank you. So Leslie, you'll start this time. What will you do to ensure that lower income people have access to affordable housing and have the means to become homeowners?
So again, I mean, I can very much appreciate that we are focused on affordable housing in this district. It is a critical issue. I think we do need to support local nonprofit providers, Action, INHS, folks that are working with community members, first-time home ownership training and seminars, and bringing folks into the mix of figuring out how to get financing and funding. Being a first-time homeowner is it's a daunting task. How can we make that a possibility for folks? Really looking at those particular opportunities. We also have opportunities in thinking a little differently about our housing. Perhaps we turn duplexes into individual condoized homes, right? We have some duplexes in District 2. Could people own half? I'm borrowing this idea from a current legislator who is also advocating for that. But there are other opportunities for shared ownership, whether it's cooperatives, whether it's condos. Home ownership is possible, but we have to get creative.
Veronica.
I would actually agree with quite a lot of that. I think to address having lower income people able to own homes, the issues are both reducing the costs of home ownership, of owning homes that exist, of shifting models so that what you have to pay for is lower, and then reducing some of the red tape barriers and really educating and coaching people on how to go through the home buying process. Because yes, it's daunting, and it's often exactly people, not always, but often people who are lower income who also have had, maybe less experience, maybe no one in their family has bought a house. They're not as well equipped to navigate these complicated systems. I think the county's in a great position to do, it already does some education on home buying and different sort of small scale development. And we could really keep pushing that and expand that to bring more people in.
Thank you. I think I'm going to go on to the next question, unless either of you wants to add anything more to what you've said. Okay. So, Veronica, I think you start on this one. Do you agree that local property taxes have skyrocketed and worked in lockstep with reassessments to produce an upward curve in grossly unaffordable rents? If so, what steps should be taken to reduce this upward curve?
Yes, I do agree that that is happening, and you can look at the numbers to see this increased property tax burden. One way to address it is to try to reduce the property tax. Again, increasing the tax base is part of it. We know because our housing vacancy rate is so low anyway, we need to build more housing. Another way, as I'd said, a bit of a longer term, but I would push for an income tax, because we know property tax is regressive, income tax is or can be progressive. So funding will come from people who have it, not so much people who are struggling to live. And finally, I would support, so that the property tax burden does not simply get pushed onto renters, I would support rent stabilization efforts. The City of Ithaca is looking at opting into the Emergency Tenant Protection Act. Part of the implementation involves county involvement, and I support the county doing as much as we can to enable implementation of that act.
Thank you. Leslie.
Certainly local property taxes have gone up. I will say the Fall Creek neighborhood, of all the city areas, has probably been reassessed more often in the last 10 years than other areas. It's reflecting the desirability of the neighborhood and the costs of resale. And so perhaps looking at our assessment methodology and not pegging it just to the highest resale value, but looking at the average assessment of neighboring properties and considering that as part of the valuation, so that a home isn't suddenly spiking for assessments when nothing's really happened to that house other than being next to a house that perhaps has undergone significant renovation. Looking at rents across the county and then thinking about them from a District 2 perspective, I think we do need to take a close look at the rents and how we can keep them not paying for property taxes, but to create a % increase cap. I know that that's something that we have, you can't exceed, but sometimes the jump, it still feels quite significant.
Thank you. Now, before you, I'm going to ask another question rather than letting you do a response to that. Since you both referred to it, should Ithaca embark upon vigorous and independent rent control to help in the effort to provide a bigger stock of truly affordable housing? Veronica.
Yes, I believe that it should. The infrastructure, or rather, the policy is already there at the state level, because we know that rising rents are a huge problem. Rents have been going up much faster than wages. People are working hard, and I support for everyone to be paid a living wage, but this is tied into understanding whether people are being charged a living rent to have housing. Housing is a human right. Everyone deserves it. And so this really becomes a human rights issue, a public health issue, when people cannot afford to simply live. I do think that as a community, we absolutely have the resources to house everyone, and this is an urgent issue. So yes, I support vigorous rent control. And specifically, as I mentioned, the Emergency Tenant Protection Act is already there with the policies and plan ready to go. All we have to do is opt in and start that work.
Thank you. Leslie.
I'm not sure that I support the extensive cap on rent control. I don't know that that is actually going to have a long-term benefit for folks that need it the most. When there's rent control, often the first person in can be income qualified, and folks that notice that there's a rent control property somehow manage often to get access to that when the property turns over, when the apartment or the house becomes available. And then folks that perhaps don't need the rent control get a great deal, right? And so what we're trying to do is make sure that people can afford to live, and have a reasonable rent. I think looking more at pegging our rents to a stable growth rate, and then looking at how we may need to subsidize affordable rents across the county would be something that would be more fairly administered and could make sure it's targeted to support folks where they need it.
You want to respond further, Veronica?
Yes, just briefly. I don't think that the aggressive rent control would be the final measure, be all and end all. I think in parallel with that, we have to look at what other measures we can take to keep rents growing with wages, really, in the long term. But in the meantime, I do think this is an urgent issue. It's affecting people who are trying to pay their rent now, who are getting evicted now, or trying to get evicted, yes, even in a pandemic. And so I think it warrants enacting for the near future.
Thank you. Leslie.
Thank you. I was pleased to see that the city is dispersing funds for relief and making sure that evictions are not happening, and that people can be supported right now with their rent, so that they get relief, they get back relief, and that we have a fund that the city has opted into for folks that are struggling. And so that's first and foremost. Second, rent control overall would be best dealt with more housing. We need to build more housing to create more of a portfolio in our housing stock. That will help bring costs down. When you have a very limited stock, then basically the market will charge what it will. That said, if we increase the number of housing units, whether they're single family homes, apartments, duplexes, that actually creates more flexibility within the market and gives people more options, and it will allow for a greater range of costs, including more affordable units.
Thank you. Now here is a follow-up question. How do you support landlords who are having to support, how do you support landlords who are having to pay increased property taxes when you're fixing the rent and they're unable to recoup their expenses through increased rental? Leslie.
So this is one of the reasons that I'm not supporting fixing a rent per se. I don't know that you can actually refund landlords, and landlords do pay first and get reimbursed. That said, I don't support landlords that are gouging tenants, that aren't giving tenants a safe, clean space that they can enjoy living in, that are making it difficult for folks who may be going through a little bit of trouble. I think that a landlord-tenant relationship is critical, having a good relationship. I don't know that there's a way that we can necessarily back fund any landlord that's losing rent. And so I'm not terribly supportive of controlling rents across the board. I think that there need to be a number of measures that play together here. We look at what the going rates are, we build more housing so that there's more flexibility within the market, and we look to help folks that are struggling.
Thank you. Do you have anything in addition to that, Veronica?
Yes. Well, first of all, my priority overall will always be supporting the needs of people whose home is on the line versus people whose like financial accounts are on the line, but who have a stable home of themselves. That said, I do, when it comes to small landlords who are treating their tenants well, who are providing responsible housing, I do think that it would be irresponsible to leave them in the lurch with rent control. So this is something to look at more closely. One thing I would advocate more for, as we've been looking at with like pandemic rent relief, is for more support from the state level in this case, because this is where the rent control policy is coming from, but state and federal level to financially support small scale landlords, not so much big corporations just trying to make a profit off of people's homes.
Thank you. So do either of you have anything additional to say on this one? No. Okay. This is an odd question. Well, not an odd question, but a slightly different question. Should owners and landlords have come together to resist or slow tax increases and reassess an overly inflated property values? It doesn't benefit either landlords or owners if people cannot afford rents now being charged or housing prices when properties are for sale. So do you think it's appropriate, and should they work together, owners and landlords? Veronica.
I think that is a fantastic idea. I don't know that I'm not familiar with if it exists, this sort of collective organizing among property owners, whether they live in the property or not, in the interests of not passing down their cost onto the renters. But I think that's a great question. I know that in general, lots of power to advocate for people's needs comes from collective organizing. This would look a bit different, but I think if I'm understanding the question right, the idea is it could still be great and would have been great if in the past owners and landlords had come together to push back against these property tax increases. Again, we could shift what sort of taxes are paying into our services. New York is the only state in the country that pays its own Medicaid out of property taxes. Why is that? There is power there to do something different.
Leslie.
I'm really interested in the question, landlords and owners. Do we mean landlords and renters? I would love to see, the landlord association and the tenants union and association get together and really work together to deal with the issues that face housing in this community. What are the issues? The issues are the costs, the straight costs of a purchase of a home, then the taxes that are added on, then the costs that get borne with maintenance and upkeep. Could folks work together to think about good mechanisms? What can the county do? The county does have the power to advocate to the state to think about larger taxing systems. It's definitely something I'm interested in. It's a long-term vision. It talks about local property taxes, thinking about our school taxes. People that live downtown in District 2 that own a home are paying a city tax, county tax, school tax on top of whatever they owe for their home. It's a heavy burden. Coordinating between folks that are renting, landlords, and potentially a third-party owner, if I heard that correctly, I think would be a really important discussion. I don't know if that's ever come to pass before.
Thank you. This question is on tax abatements and affordable housing. For all housing projects that are requesting tax abatements, should it be required to mix low-income, affordable, and market rate housing within one project to receive the abatement? Leslie.
Thank you. That is an excellent goal. However, not every project can bring that to bear. Not every project, say even an affordable housing development, can have market rate housing within it. And so there are rules and barriers from different funding sources, including the state and federal government, that won't allow for those mixes. A mixed income community is an ideal development in my mind. Mix of uses, mix of incomes really creates a vibrant, diverse community that can support a larger kind of vision that we want to see in our county, right? That said, can a market rate development that's coming forth for an abatement, does it have to have affordable housing? I think that's absolutely a public amenity we should ask, and we do. In fact, right now, we have a requirement that $5,000 per unit be put into the Affordable Housing Development Fund if there aren't affordable units that are included in a development. However, it's not just units that are important. Public amenities are critical.
Thank you. Veronica.
I agree that mixed use developments are pretty much ideal. And I think that in deciding where to give tax abatements, I would hesitate to name almost anything. There are exceptions as an absolute requirement for all projects. But I think that we should definitely prioritize giving abatements to projects who mix market rate and affordable housing. But I also think it's great to build projects that are just affordable housing, just low income affordable housing. I'm talking not like 80% of area median income, but below that. I think that's also a need of the community. But again, supporting as a plus in the decision-making mixed low income affordable and market rate housing is also great, because yes, that's that with mixed use is where you can get some vibrant community buildup.
Thank you. Now we've got a lot of questions here, and yes, Leslie.
Might I come back for a moment to that
Yes.
topic? Thank you. I just want to add, for truly affordable, purely affordable projects that are coming through, we do have great mechanisms locally in the IURA with the city, as well as IHA, that supports the development and management of long-term affordable housing at various income levels, including some very low income levels. And those are critical between Section 8 housing through 30% of median income up to 80%. All of those are considered affordable housing developments, and making sure that we can hit each of those levels. But if we can include those in a larger project, it is much more successful. That said, to the public amenities portion, including our waterfront that's being developed right now, creating a public promenade, public parks, public sidewalk systems, and even public docks that will benefit the entire community. Amenities like that are also important. And so if a project's bringing forth something that has a real public benefit, we need to consider that too.
Thank you. Veronica.
I'm good.
No. Okay. Well, I'm going to switch now to two specific questions before going over onto public safety. The first one addresses youth recreational spaces. What do you think we should do to develop recreational spaces and facilities, especially for children and teenagers in Tompkins County? Veronica.
Great question. I think supporting the needs of children and teenagers is hugely important, and just overall the health and development of the youngest people in our population. We know that just life and growing conditions at early ages have huge effects on individuals, like successful happiness outcomes going through their life, as well as that of the community as a whole that they participate in. I would certainly support starting with looking at agencies that already do child recreational support work, like Ithaca Youth Bureau, GIAC, Southside Community Center, and begin by partnering with them and trying to bring them all together, Ithaca Children's Garden, and look at what are they already learning on the ground with kids, what are people asking for, and go from there to really prioritize this.
Thank you. Leslie.
I would say that to really address youth services, we need to create an umbrella organization and turn County Youth Services into that kind of coordinating body that does look at how we provide programs, services, amenities, opportunities to kids all across the county, make sure that we're not competing with one another. So GEOC offers great services. Southside, as Veronica mentioned, great services. We also have Ithaca Youth Bureau, but in the summertime, Cass Park and the pool acts like its own independent entity, as does the pool downtown. So how do we really think about that holistically so that it serves kids? I am advocating for the county to take a stronger role in that, to lead in creating an umbrella organization around youth services programming and tie it into outdoor recreation and parks. So look at our park system, whether it be in the city or the county in the larger area, as well as all of these youth programming opportunities, and try to coordinate them better and target them so that people understand what the offerings are. We have a great community and we have wonderful offerings for families and programs, but it's hard to find out. And sometimes
Your time's up.
that coordinated.
Yeah. Did you have a rebuttal, Veronica? No, okay. The second question concerns the pandemic. The district has experienced significant negative consequences because of the economic fallout of COVID-19. While I have no doubt that advocacy to Albany is a key element of any recovery strategy, what policy would you implement to promote healthy economic recovery and growth for workers and businesses in the community? Leslie.
Thank you. I'm really interested in focusing on workforce development. I think there's a great opportunity here, and we should take advantage of that and focus on how we can tie into our local trades, into our excellent higher education sector, as well as our health sector and advanced manufacturing. All of these areas are definitely ripe for expanding and for creating a wraparound kind of pipeline for our youth. So talking to the youth services, we were just talking about what are their plans for the future? How can we make sure that schools are plugged into trades, are plugged into great new jobs in a new energy sector and expanding health sector? Even right now during COVID, we've learned a lot and we've tried on new things and found out that there are different ways to reach people. We need more mental health services in this community. And I would say that our health sector is a growing opportunity area.
Thank you. Veronica.
Certainly, as stated in the question, advocacy to Albany is part of this for economic relief. Certainly as well, continuing to vaccinate people as quickly as possible and effectively and thoroughly, just so that it's safe to open up our businesses and other things that supported our economy. Beyond that, I agree that workforce development is a huge piece of this. And this also ties into sustainability issues, as we can work on training people to do a lot of our development and construction jobs in the direction of greening buildings and such. On top of that, I would support bringing everyone's wages up to a living wage as much as possible, requiring that when the county can and advocating it when we legally can't, because we know that when people have money to spend, they'll spend it more. If they're struggling, if they just don't have the money, that's not going into the economy.
Thank you. Yes, Leslie.
I want to say workforce development issues are something that we aspire to. So I wanted to start with something that's very aspirational, but we do have to keep our focus on the here and now. And right now, we need to support our county Department of Health in making sure that the COVID vaccine is distributed as quickly as possible. We need to reach out to communities and meet them where they are. We need to go to folks that are homebound. We need to meet senior citizens in their senior homes. We need to support making sure that folks that might be a little hesitant about the vaccine have the best information, because it's true, we can't reopen. It's really difficult to start up anything, and we really do need to reinvest in this economy and leisure and recreation and all the great things that we all want to do. but we have to address COVID first.
Thank you. Did you have anything else to say, Veronica?
No.
No, I'd like now to move on to public safety. A draft report from the city and the county for reimagining public safety is now available for public comment. Have you had an opportunity to read this report? And what aspects of it do you support? And are there any changes you would like to see made to it? Veronica.
Yes, I've read most of the report. The parts that I'm especially enthusiastic about are the particular recommendations for more transparency, both collecting of data of how our court system is used, how our policing systems are used, and publishing that data and really looking back at it regularly so that the public can know what is going on with what we call our criminal justice system locally. I'm also excited about the recommendations for partnership, especially with our mental health services and law enforcement services, because we know that right now we kind of use the police as a catch-all, like call for almost any emergency, and sending in people with military training to all sorts of crises is just not appropriate and often escalates it. So I'm excited about that. I would like to see funding diverted away from reactive policing, though, and into proactive community programs, and I don't see that in the report.
Thank you. Leslie.
Yes, the reimagining report and the collaboration that the city and the county, and most importantly, the community have put into real dedicated and committed effort to think about what we want to look like as a community with regard to public safety in the long term, I think is a commendable effort. It's a draft report. It's a first effort. It has a number of recommendations. Some of them are quite exciting. Yeah, I like data too. So I think that's a great one. It's thinking how we can bring GIS in and, what will that reveal if we can look at our data across different police units, across different municipalities. That could be quite revealing. I would suggest that, I think what we heard was that there's a big lack of trust on both sides, and we need more communication. I would like to see a long-term plan. This didn't happen overnight, and we're not going to fix it overnight. We are going to need to dedicate and commit ourselves to long-term working together as a community, bringing both sides to the table and working on this over another year, trying things, piloting things.
Thank you.
And then back to the community.
Veronica, you want to add anything?
Yes, I just want to emphasize, I think what I touched on briefly, there have been, through this reimagining process and before, for a long time, there have been strong calls from many members of the public to, we hear it as defund the police, and how I interpret that is, think about what are our priorities as a community and what keeps us safe. The police are an important part of many scenarios that people rely on, but they respond to crises that are already happening. We need to ask, and people do ask, what's creating the crises in the first place? How can we, instead of funding response to crisis, fund preventative measures like housing, living wages, healthcare, things of that nature? That's what I think is missing in this report, mostly.
Thank you. Leslie.
I think that what's, it's kind of a first step in the report is thinking about the redistribution of funding, right? How will that happen? It's hard to say in a draft. So to be fair, what else would I like to see? I would see the final report, like everybody, right? But we're still waiting for more community feedback. So I've been attending the town halls, been really listening to folks. I do think that people appreciate the sincerity of the effort. I'm not sure that people think it goes far enough. And I think that happens on both sides of the discussion right now. And so again, I think thinking about what social services we could provide to folks so that they do not come into crisis. I do like the idea of paired responses, thinking about if there's a social service provider, if there's a mental health provider, making sure we have mental health services 24/7 and not just during, say, working hours. That will mean resourcing. That is the county's job, to think about appropriate resources.
Thank you. What is your position regarding the proposal in the report to replace the Ithaca Police Department with the Community Solutions and Public Safety Department? And what impact do you think this will have on the Sheriff's Department? Leslie.
This is an important discussion. Alongside the global pandemic that's killed 6 million people, 2020 has really pulled the bandage off of a gaping wound. And thinking about public safety and policing is something that's visceral, and folks are really sensitive to these discussions. I would say, what do we do with the police department if some people feel that when they call that they're not properly supported, or they can't safely call because they're worried, or they can't call someone in an emergency? That's a problem. I would say the city and the mayor feel comfortable completely changing their outlook and the way that they structure their community policing department. It's fair to really rethink it. Let's put it back on the table. Let's ask people to apply. Let's look at what this can be. Public safety officers do not all have to be armed.
Veronica.
I commend the broad scale thinking that's led to renaming and restructuring the police department. I think that's the scale that we need to be thinking on. And yet I think that particular proposal sounds better than it really is. I saw headlines about getting rid of the police department, and that isn't really what's happening if you look behind the name into the proposal, as we all have. My concern here is that what I'm hearing much of the community say is that they want more of the response needs to be diverted away from the police entirely. Policing as an institution, no matter how wonderful the officers are, is fundamentally this has evolved from slave patrols. It's white supremacy is baked into the institution, no matter how you try to serve within it, unfortunately. So I would really like to see a lot of this unarmed response be handled outside of the revamped police department entirely.
Thank you. Leslie.
Just realized we didn't address the county sheriff and how it might or might not impact the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office is run independent, of course, of the Ithaca Police Department, headed by an elected official. I would say that I feel our sheriff's office is progressive, is tied into our progressive DA's thinking, and is focused on alternatives to incarceration. Does that mean everything is perfect? No. Does that mean this is a time of reflection? And if their partner unit in the IPD becomes something very different, will that have impacts on policing in the county? It most certainly will. How that all plays out really is going to depend on what finally gets adopted at both the city and the county levels.
Veronica?
Yes, thank you. I also forgot to address the sheriff's office. I think my understanding is that the sheriff's office and the DA and IPD are consistently working on their relationships with each other and how they interact. So if there's a big change at the Ithaca police level, I do expect that our sheriff's department will respond. And I think, yes, our sheriff is thinking proactively about how to shift that work away from militarization, away from incarceration. And again, I want to offer the caveat that we, in the county legislator role, we won't have direct oversight over the sheriff's office or IPD, though, of course, I think our perspectives and our platforms do inform that those decisions and process.
Thank you. Now we're beginning to run out of time, but I have one very short question to you both, and I'd like you to answer it in just very quickly. And you start this time, Veronica. Are you prepared to support the county spending more money and thus increasing taxes to achieve the goal we are aiming for with public security?
Could I ask for clarification on the goal we are aiming for?
Well, we're looking at reimagining public safety. Are you prepared to increase taxes in order to provide additional resources to make this report work?
I am prepared to increase taxes to support the goals that I'm hearing the grassroots community aiming for. As I've said, I don't fully support the goals in the report, in the draft report. Again, we'll see what gets approved and what comes out of our conversations. So I would not say that I necessarily support raising taxes for this report in the form it is in at this time.
Thank you. Leslie.
I think it'll be really important to look at the entire budget together and think about this public safety effort and the resourcing of it in the context of the COVID effort. I have definitely heard Molino, the county administrator, talk about, when we have attended to COVID and we feel that folks are safe and that we can return to a sense of normalcy and regular living, we will take the same level of effort and apply it to public safety from the county's perspective. And so I think that that is really important. What that means as far as financial commitment and how that ties into taxes, I think it has to be considered in the broad spectrum of other budgetary requirements and desires across the board for all departments. Do I think this is important enough to focus resources to? Yes, I do. What does that mean? How much? And what does it mean for taxes? That is a broader discussion.
Thank you. Now, this next one is a one-word answer question in order for you to have time for your 1-minute final statements. And that is, do you think Cornell should pay an increased payment in lieu of taxes to the city of Ithaca? And remember, you're running for the county, and this is a question about Cornell and the city of Ithaca. Leslie.
So I would say that the county's perspective is the county and Cornell are collaborators, and that together we advocate this to the state for grant funding, for funding to come to this larger community, as well as to the city of Ithaca. Cornell does pay the city of Ithaca, as well as supports any number of county departments, county initiatives, TCAT. Asking for a one lump sum is kind of an ongoing discussion, I know, between the city and Cornell, as well as, others. It is the time immemorial question.
I'm asking for a one-word answer, Leslie. I let you run on.
It's really difficult to answer anything like that in one word. I would say.
Well, I'm going to cut you off now. Otherwise, you lose your final statement. Veronica.
Yes, I do think that Cornell should pay more payments in lieu of taxes to the city of Ithaca.
Thank you. And now, Veronica, if you're ready for your final statement.
Yes. First, thank you, Sally. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for having us, and thank you to everyone who's attended tonight. It's been wonderful to share my thoughts with you, and I look forward to hopefully being your next legislator. I'm proud to have the endorsements at this point of several progressive groups, of labor unions, of some grassroots activists, and some other elected officials. I am thrilled to have the support of the Working Families Party because they know I'm the grassroots candidate in this race. My purpose here, I'm running not for myself, but for the community, to really serve all the residents of the county, truly, and especially the district, and make sure that those who are most marginalized, those struggling the most, have everything they need to thrive in Tompkins County, because that means that we all have what we need to thrive in Tompkins County. And so thank you all. 12 days to Election Day. Check out veronicafortompkins.com if you'd like to get more involved.
Thank you. Leslie.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate you having me into your home this evening. It's been wonderful talking with you and taking questions. We have a lot to do. I just want to bring my commitment, my dedication, my energy, and my expertise to bear for our community. I think that now is the time to really step up. We have no time for wasting, really. We have to invest this time in addressing COVID first, and then look at the rest of our community. I have big aspirations for this community. I want to make sure that we tackle mental health, personal well-being, support our families with childcare options that are real. Think about this youth services opportunity. Bring in a CCC effort to really get youth back working in revitalizing parks and places. Invest in our workforce development and think about how we can focus on environment and climate justice. Leslie for Legislature, and I look forward to having your vote. I would be proud and honored.
Thank you all very much. And we've now exceeded our time. And so thank you all for coming, and good night.
Good job, Veronica.